Walk any damp eastern trail this summer, and you pass two plants growing side by side. One leaves your skin blistered and itching for a week. The other, right next to it, was used for centuries to make that itch stop. Most people walk past it anyway, heading home to a miserable week of calamine and oatmeal baths. The native tribes who lived here did not. They snapped the stem, rubbed the cool juice on the skin, and the itch backed off. It grows out there for free, right beside the thing that burns you. So why were we taught to forget it? Welcome to Nature's Lost Vault. The plant is called jewelweed. If you have walked any wet trail in the eastern half of North America in late summer, you have almost certainly stepped over it without a second look. It stands about 2 to 5 feet tall, with soft, translucent stems that look almost too juicy to be real, and a small, trumpet-shaped flower in orange or pale yellow hanging off a thin, curled stalk. Pinch a stem, and it gives way at once, wet and green and cool against your fingers. The old country names tell you what people used it for. Touch me not, for the seed pods that burst at the lightest brush. Snapweed, for the way the stem breaks open in your hand. And in a lot of backwoods households, it had no fancy name at all. It was just the green stuff you rubbed on after you walked through the wrong patch of leaves. This is where it gets strange. Jewelweed likes the same ground poison ivy likes. Wet woodland borders, the shaded lip of a riverbank, the low, damp ditch running along a country road. The botanists who have studied both plants keep landing on the same observation. Where you find the one, you very often find the other, sometimes tangled into the same stretch of shade with their leaves overlapping. The rash and the relief growing side by side in the same wet dirt. Often a single patch of shade holds both, so the walk that presses poison ivy oil onto a sleeve passes within arm's reach of the remedy 2 steps later. For someone walking these woods 200 years ago, that was not a curiosity. It was practically a map. The plant that hurt you and the plant that soothed you stood in the same place, at the same time of year, and only one of them was soft enough to crush in a bare fist. The practice itself shows up again and again in the records of Native American plant medicine across the eastern tribes. You would gather a handful of jewelweed stems, the juicier the better, mash them between your palms until the green sap ran, and wipe that straight onto the skin that had just brushed the poison ivy. The same sap went on nettle stings, insect bites, and minor scrapes, anywhere the skin was hot and angry. Some people simmered the whole plant down into a dark tea and froze it in cubes to carry the remedy through the winter. Settlers learned the trick from the tribes they lived alongside, and jewelweed worked its way into homemade salves and the back pages of old farm almanacs. For generations, it was simply common knowledge, the kind of thing a grandmother pointed out at the creek. Used soon after contact, the cool sap pulled the heat and the itch straight out of the skin. So the fair question is whether any of that holds up under real testing, or whether it is just an old folk story people wanted to be true. The honest answer turns out to be more interesting than a clean yes or no. When researchers finally tested it, fresh jewelweed, mashed straight from the living stem, did bring poison ivy rash down in a controlled trial. The bottled jewelweed extracts, the kind sold today as a spray or a bar of soap, mostly did no better than plain soap. Those two results point at the same simple thing. The effect came down to something far simpler than a hidden compound. The sap behaves like soap, lifting the poison ivy oil off the skin before it can soak in and trigger the reaction. That oil even has a name, urushiol, and it is the entire problem. Get it off the skin quickly, and there is far less rash left to fight. That also explains a puzzle that tripped up some of the early studies. Urushiol starts bonding to skin within minutes of contact. When researchers waited and dabbed a weak extract on long after the oil had already locked in, it did almost nothing, and the plant got written off as a myth. The people who actually relied on it were never waiting. They wiped the fresh sap on within minutes, out in the field, while the oil could still be carried away. Fairly judged, jewelweed earns its keep right after contact, as the first thing reached for before the rash has a chance to set. Smeared on a 3-day-old blister, long after the oil has done its damage, it has little left to offer. As a free, fast way to rinse poison ivy oil off the skin in the field, it earns the reputation it carried for centuries. Which raises the harder question. If a plant growing free in almost every wet ditch can take the sting out of one of the most common rashes in the country, why is it not the first thing anyone reaches for? Why did it slide out of the medicine cabinet and almost out of memory altogether? The answer is not a conspiracy. It is the simple arithmetic of what can be sold. Calamine lotion and hydrocortisone cream are cheap to manufacture. They sit on a shelf for years without spoiling. They arrive in a clean-labeled bottle, and a company can stamp its name on them. Jewelweed can do none of that. It is a wild annual that wilts within a day of being picked. It cannot be standardized into a pill, it cannot be patented, and it cannot be shipped to 10,000 pharmacies in identical containers. A remedy that grows for nothing and dies in your pocket is worth almost nothing to anyone trying to build a business on it. So the bottle got the shelf space, the advertising, and the doctor's quick recommendation. The plant got mowed down at the edge of the parking lot. Nobody ever had to hide jewelweed. The market simply had no reason to keep reminding us it was there. Finding this one is the easy part. Jewelweed is not rare, and it is not hard to spot once the shape is familiar. From about midsummer onward, it crowds along shaded creek banks, damp trail edges, and the low, wet ground where the soil never quite dries out. The giveaway is that 2 to 5 foot stand of soft, almost see-through stems, with the little orange or yellow trumpets dangling on thin stalks. Hold a leaf underwater, and it turns bright silver. And very often the poison ivy is right there beside it, 3 glossy leaves climbing the same bank. The traditional method was about as simple as medicine ever got. A fistful of juicy stems, crushed until the sap ran thick and green, wiped over the skin that touched the poison ivy, then rinsed with whatever water was at hand. The sooner after contact, the better it held up. That was the whole of it, done at the edge of a field with nothing bought and nothing labeled. One honest caution belongs in here. Jewelweed was always meant for the ordinary, maddening poison ivy itch. A severe reaction, the kind that spreads across the body, swells the face, reaches the eyes, or tightens the breathing, was never a job for a plant pulled from a ditch. That is a doctor, and sometimes an emergency room. Remembering the free remedy is not the same as ignoring the dangerous version of the problem. But for the everyday case, the itching forearm after a long afternoon in the woods, the answer had been sitting in the ditch the entire time. It grows right out in the open, every single summer, often taller and brighter than the poison ivy it leans against, practically waiting to be noticed. The only thing that ever went missing was our reason to look for it. So the next time you catch those little orange trumpets nodding over a wet bank, you will know what you are looking at. The oldest poison ivy remedy on the continent, still growing for free, right where it has always stood. If this changed how you see the wild plants in your own backyard, Subscribe to Nature's Lost Vault and help keep what the modern world set aside from slipping away again. The next one opens soon.